What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty here with another episode of Steelers Touching Under. We are pumping out the videos at the moment. Draft, off-season rolls on, free agency moves potentially be made. The big rumor over the last 24 hours, really going back to pre-draft though, is around the Steelers acquiring a proven wide receiver to pair with George Pickens, even though they drafted Roman Wilson at 84. At 84 in round 3. Now, there's a lot of rumor around Brandon Aiyuk. We've talked about him on the channel a couple weeks ago with that video. We've talked to him a lot about Courtland Sutton. He's another one for the Steelers that has been rumored there. We've talked a lot about, I was just checking my alerts to see if there was a trade as it popped up from the Steelers, but it was a Logan Lee video. But then there's been a lot of rumor around Courtland Sutton, familiar with Russell Wilson. I've also seen the odd rumor around Metcalf and Terry McLaurin. So I thought we'd delve into this. Now, I did some research. I'm recording this about 11:30 at night, my time. I thought I'd just see in case Steelers sign someone in the morning. So they may well sign someone by the time you see this video. But I did a lot of research into all these guys. Less so on the stats. Everyone will quote their stats, but more on the monetary value. Now, the Steelers are through the 2024 NFL draft, so they can use 25 capital. So we're not wasting any capital in the draft capital this year going for them. That would be an addition that's a future pick, which is a good thing because the guys that we're talking about mostly, and the names that have come up a lot, are all guys that are sort of mostly all above 27. So you don't want to invest heaps of too much draft capital in that when you can go get younger guys next year. But equally, you don't want to be in the situation where you leave just the young guys that they've got on the team right now. There's also a mix of guys that are either free agents in a Hunter Renfrow. Michael Gallup was signed for $3 million with the Raiders. Tyler Boyd's apparently more expensive. I didn't think and look about like Tyler Boyd. I think he's too expensive. I agree with that sentiment. I think he said some really horrible things about the Steelers, and I don't know. I think it's gone beyond what's just pure gamesmanship. So in my mind, I'm not really a fan of bringing Boyd in. And also, if they were going to do that, they would have done that by now, in my opinion. So I left Boyd out of when I've done this mix. So there are a couple of names that are really interesting. Now, the first name I'll bring to you is certainly when I look at things right now is DK Metcalf. Now, DK Metcalf played with Russell Wilson at the Seahawks. Everyone will know that. They know they came to town. And that was the game that Big Ben did his arm, and in came Mason Rudolph. Now, DK Metcalf, if he was traded, this year he's got a cap number hit of $24.5 million. If you traded him this year before the June deadline, because it'll be cheaper than after that, there is a cap saving of $9.5 million. $9.5 million for the Seattle Seahawks. If you look at their wide receiver room too, they do have Tyler Lockett. Now he's beyond the age that I think the Steelers would be prepared to bring someone in. The other bonus is with DK Metcalf is he's on contract for a little bit. He's not someone that's like old or that you're going to have to re-sign on a contract like a Brandon Aiyuk, like a T. Higgins, for example, who we've talked on the channel before. So I'm going to try and steer clear of necessarily going deep into those blokes because we've already covered that on the channel. I'll link that in here as well. But when you also look at the wide receivers, they got Jackson Smith in Jigma. Previously, he's 22. He's a cheap guy. They've got Bobo. They've got a couple of other wide receivers as well. Dwayne Eskridge. They've got George Fant. They had Noah Fant. They traded him. But yeah, they've still got Noah Fant. Sorry. Yeah, that's right. So they've got different receiving targets. You could get away with not having Metcalf, and they could go and sign someone like a Tyler Boyd or a Hunter Renfrow, for example. So that's kind of interesting when I deeply looked at DK Metcalf's contract particularly, because the other thing about looking at DK Metcalf and his contract is that if you look at what he's going to get paid next year, it's a flat $29.5 million cap number. However, when I say flat, the base salary is $18 million. Then he's got like signing bonuses and an option. Now, signing bonuses has already been given to him. And that's been paid. There's the option bonus as well of the $4 million. There's not detail into this in terms of what that specifically is, but the base salary number is $18 million. That's not too bad. That is not too bad in terms of what you're going to get out of DK Metcalf, a proven guy. Now, the other thing is he's a great target for Justin Fields if it is in fact the situation where Russell Wilson isn't staying with the Steelers beyond 1 year. But he does make up 11.3% of the cap in 2025 and 9.4% of the cap in 2024 for the Seahawks, which is a large amount of cap for that team considering where they are right now. The other thing that I thought was interesting is when I went and did a player comparison I was doing Courtland Sutton and I was doing Terry McLaurin and I was trying to do Metcalf as well. This starting to get pretty interesting. If you go into the top 10 guys at the position now, this includes Amon-Ra St. Brown, it includes Devonta Smith, it includes Michael Pittman, all who, Pittman's on the franchise tag, but there's an extension for Smith, an extension for Amon-Ra St. Brown, extension for Cooper Kupp as well. When you look at average pay per year, Terry McLaurin and Courtland Sutton are obviously the cheapest. We've talked about that with Aiyuk costing probably on a 4-year deal more than 25. Metcalf is on $24 million, but the way that his bonus has been set up because of the guaranteed money means that he is kind of a little bit more paid for, because when you look at the percentage of the guaranteed, Kupp, Devonta Smith are up there along with AJ Brown, then Deebo Samuel, and then DK Metcalf. However, when you look at the average pay per year, that's probably the easiest way of doing this with Deebo Samuel versus Metcalf. Metcalf is slightly higher by like $150,000, but the guarantee is actually different, which makes DK Metcalf cheaper for the Steelers to acquire than acquiring Deebo Samuel. Now, yes, Deebo Samuel offers more with them in that the sweep game, in that probably the Arthur Smith offense. But DK Metcalf stretches a field like nothing else. So that's that's an interesting element to all of this in terms of Metcalf is actually cheaper in many ways than Deebo Samuel will be overall over across a contract if you're acquiring them and you plan to have them for more than 4 years, which that deal will allow with Metcalf. He's going to probably be a better option than Deebo Samuel, putting play style aside. Staying with the Seahawks, Tyler Lockett, as I said, is probably too old for them. He's a bloke that will have a cap hit number of just under 19 million this year, 30 million next year. Now, the Seahawks could move him and save 5 million this year and save 17 million next year, but they're better to ride it out with him and have him mentor Jackson Smith-Njigba and a potentially wide receiver next year than move him on right now. So that kind of makes a little bit less sense when I look at it overall. The other thing that I thought that was really interesting when I was doing this was looking at Terry McLaurin particularly. Now, I'm going to show you guys a different screen because I think that this tells you something else entirely. So if we look at Deebo Samuel, Deebo Samuel goes void in 2026 and 2027. So you have him next year when he turns 29, but he's older by a year than Metcalf. So not only that, remember what I said before, Metcalf is slightly more expensive per year, but less in terms of the fact that he doesn't have as high. He's guaranteed money. He got paid less. So Deebo Samuel's been covered there. But he's got a void year in 30 in 2026 when he's 30 and a void year in 2027. So you are getting a player who's 28 going on 29 that you would have to re-sign with an overall higher cap hit number. There are also per game bonuses that Deebo has that DK Metcalf doesn't have. DK Metcalf has an option bonus, and the option bonus is something that wasn't specified what is within that. But there's ways you can manipulate that. There's ways that you can sort of spread that out. There's restructures that you can do to make that more manageable. But when you go to Deebo Samuel, that's a per game roster bonus. Now, obviously, he's got to stay fit with that. That was the way that they wanted to manage him in terms of he was injured and he wanted to be paid like a running back and a wide receiver. So that is why they've done it in that way. Now, avoidable years, the Steelers aren't up for those avoidable years, right? So that's one thing to make very, very clear. They don't have to pay that. That's going to be paid by San Francisco. In fact, it's technically already been paid. But it's when that money will go to him then, but it's part of those bonuses. So from that element as well, Deebo Samuel then becomes a more expensive proposition. So right now, DK Metcalf is actually cheaper when you look at this. Not as cheap as Courtland Sutton, and will cost more trade capital, but won't cost a first rounder. There was an article about that pre-draft from actually a Seahawks, YouTuber and an article writer. But but so not as cheap as Courtland Sutton, obviously, but DK Metcalf is less expensive than Deebo and Aiyuk, and definitely T. Higgins as well, particularly because T. Higgins is going to be expensive for the Steelers to trade for, and he's going to be expensive in terms of the contract he wants. I would love to see T. Higgins in a Steelers uniform. I think T. Higgins is a fantastic player, but I think it's way too much for the Steelers to spend at the position, particularly because they're going to have to do something about Russ or something about Justin Fields through this season into next season. So then I went to another player, and this was kind of interesting. I went to the Washington Commanders. Now, if you look at their receivers outside of running back, they've got Dax Milne, who's a decent, 3 or 4 wide receiver. Diami Brown, who I was really high on coming out of college. He's a good deep receiver. Jamison Crowder, who's a decent wide receiver depth at 4 or 5. Zacchaeus as well, who's proven he can do a little bit in the league. Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, who they drafted in this draft, and then, of course, they've got Terry McLaurin. Now, Terry McLaurin is definitely their number one bloke, 100%. But this team also has Cole Turner, a receiving tight end, Ben Sinnott, who they drafted in this draft, who was considered the second or third best, depending on the ratings, but most people had him as the second best tight end. And they have Zach Ertz. They're also a team that want to run the rock. They want to run the football. And so when I looked at this team, I'm like, because particularly when you got Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Eckler, who can catch it in the passing game, Jeremy Nichols, Chris Rodriguez. This is a team out of all of those guys putting the Seahawks side in their ambitions and the rebuild that the Commanders are in with Jaden Daniels. They could afford to move Terry McLaurin on. So if that's the case, right, what would Terry McLaurin cost? So he is on the slightly older side in the Courtland Sutton, Deebo Samuel bucket, but he's 29 this year, 30 next year. So he's a little bit older than Deebo. His guaranteed salary this year is $8.5 million, with his base salary of $15 million. He also is getting bonuses, a per game bonus and a regular roster bonus as well, plus a workout bonus. So that's kind of starts to get a little bit complicated out there, right? But if Washington was to move him before the June deadline, the dead money would be a $16.8 million cap hit, so a bit less than for some of these other teams. And they would save $7.3 million on their cap, which that $7.3 million could be easily used, if you look at $3 million for Gallup, to sign Boyd or Renfro. Terry McLaurin is also someone that I think, with the way he stretches the field, would be a very good acquisition in the Arthur Smith offense. He's a 205-pound guy. He's 6'1". He's like this Malachi Corley, Deebo Samuel type, but probably a better deep threat. You look at his stats now. Over the cap might not have obviously the best stats. They're more of the cap side. But you look at his overall stats. He's a guy with like almost 30 TDs. He averages 1,000 yards a season. The Steelers don't have that. They have not had that guy. 2019, 919 yards. 1,100 yards, over 1,100 yards in 2020. Over 1,000 yards in 2021. Almost 1,200 yards in 2022. And even with how terrible the offense was with the Commanders last year, with Sam Howell at quarterback, still 1,000 yards. Terry McLaurin makes almost the most sense for the Steelers to go out and get, even more than Courtland Sutton. Now, I started this show saying I wasn't going to cover deeply Courtland Sutton and Brandon Aiyuk and T. Higgins because the cost part that compensate both the cost of what his contract will be and the compensation, and the fact that Bengals aren't going to probably trade him with the division. It doesn't make sense for them. Brandon Aiyuk, everyone's covered a lot. I think he's going to want way too much money, and the capital you're going to have to give up as well is higher than some of these other blokes. And it sounds like they might want to keep him with where they're shifting offense because of who they got in Ricky Pearsall. And that would open up opportunities. I think Deebo is actually the one more on the trade, more on this block right now, because he is going to come off contract and they're not going to get anything really for him at that point, and with his 2 votable years. So, and particularly with the way they use McCaffrey. So Deebo seems the odd one out, but again, I don't think it makes sense to Steelers because you're getting nothing long term. The other thing about Courtland Sutton that I think a lot of people need to remember and need to think about is the fact that Courtland Sutton is a better fit for Bo Nix than some of their other wide receivers. Their wide receiver room is very thin since they traded Jerry Jeudy to the Browns. Courtland Sutton, there's been lots of rumors, is he in favor, is he out of favor? There was also McFadden's tweet set the cat amongst pigeons because it said George Pickens can keep his number. Courtland Sutton wears 14. People jump to that conclusion. Terry McLaurin wears 17. I don't see anyone right now with a Steelers 17 number. George Pickens can keep his number. Terry McLaurin makes the most sense because he combines the age with the experience, with the production, with the fit, with the Arthur Smith offense and stretching the field. He also is a guy that can play anywhere in terms of like if you want Terry McLaurin on the field, you can get this guy doing anything. Like he can play in and anywhere. He's one of the best. He was one of my favorite wide receivers a couple of years back. I've not wanted to watch a lot of Washington football, which is why like I can't necessarily speak to all of the production last year and how he's performed, but rather than look for you through a lot of stats. But he's played over the course of his career, he's played 23.7% in the slot, 76.2% out wide. So he can go into the slot when you want him to. Last year, he played about 15.2% in the slot. The year before that, when he was really productive, it was 20% in the slot. The year before that, when he was really productive, it was 27% in the slot. And then before that in 2020, when he had 1,000 yards, it was 31.2% in the slot. So when you look at what he can do, he's well within that situation. He also has a very low drop percentage of 4.7% for his total career. 19 drops in his whole 5-year career in the NFL going into this season. So to me, when I look at this, and I alluded to it on Twitter, and I deleted one of the tweets because there was a number I saw with Terry McLaurin that didn't make sense, and then I delve into it a bit more. I actually think if the Steelers are going to go out and get a wide receiver, go get freaking Terry McLaurin and let's cook, baby. But you let me know in the comments, who do you want? Do you want Aiyuk? Do you want Sutton? Do you want Higgins? Do you want Deebo Samuel? Do you want DK Metcalf? Or do you want Terry McLaurin? I think DK Metcalf or Terry McLaurin make the most sense. I actually think Terry McLaurin with the manageable part to his contract, the fact you can get him for 2025, he's on an avoidable year with Washington after that. You can look to extend him. You could turn that into a bonus. You can keep him for another 2 years in 2025, 2026. You're giving either Justin Fields or Russ a top wide receiver. Makes a lot of sense to me. But you let me know in the comments, who do you want? Who would you love them to have? And what compensation would you do? Because I think they can get away with trading a second or a third, a future second or a third with Terry McLaurin. I think the Washington Commanders will take that. They're in a rebuild. They'll take every pick they can get, even if you've got to use a 2026 pick as well. But I said, let me know in the comments. All we can cheer on and say is, go Steelers.